Hello, I am glad to present my paper, Burning Kazan, Visualizing the Trauma of the Conquest of Kazan, in the children's magazine Salawat Küpere, Rainbow. Who are you? Said Bulat to his sister Sümbül. Just a year ago, he was asked the same question by his father. I am Sümbül, said her sister. And who is Sümbül? Bulat asked, rejoicing that he was already big. Sümbül is a person, said the little girl. What kind of person? Sümbül thought a little while. Bulat did not hurt her. And his sister found the answer anyway, Tatar. Bulat also responded the same way to his father a year ago. Soon after, his father told him many sapiential stories about the Tatars. Bulat learned how his distant ancestors lived many centuries ago. He found out that those events are called the history of our people. This passage illustrates the concept of history offered by the Salawat Küpere. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in the Republic of Tatarstan, as well as throughout the Union, there was an increase of nationalism, which was also largely connected with the growth of religiosity after the fall of the ideology based on atheism. Islam became an important part of the identity of the Muslim Tatars. At the same time, in the 1990s, the term nationalist was often given different meanings. During this period, the Tatars began to rethink their history. The history was reorganized around other in relation to the usual Soviet organization of history, traumatic events of the past. The conquest of Kazan by Ivan the Terrible in 1552 and the violent baptism of Muslim Tatars in the 18th century. On the one hand, certainly politically, nationalist circles attempted to instrumentalize this discourse. On the other hand, this theme served as a source of inspiration for the academic and creative elite of Tatarstan. Works in the spheres of music, fiction, theater, and fine arts were devoted to the interrupted glorious history of the Tatars and the bloody conquest of Kazan with subsequent traumas. The visual materials were often published in numerous Tatar periodicals of the new post-Soviet era. In addition, important changes have occurred in the field of language. In particular, the Tatar language started to be used and more actively in the media. Books in the Tatar language appeared more often. The periodical press published in the Tatar language changed quantitatively and qualitatively. The periodical press in the 1990s, to some extent, was related to the Tatar periodical press published before the Russian Revolution of 1970. On the one hand, the Tatar press of the 1990s continued the Soviet tradition. On the other hand, it was embedded into the tradition of the pre-revolutionary Muslim Tatar press, published between the two revolutions of 1905 and 1917. The main areas of Tatar newspapers were issues of culture and history of the Tatar people, problems of the Tatar language. At the same time, the Russian language newspapers published in the Republic of Tatarstan also did not ignore the theme of the Tatar culture and literature, but almost did not concern the Russian culture. The Tatar language newspapers were most successful in filling the ideological vacuum created of the rejection of communist ideas. They purposefully formed the historical consciousness of readers, foster a patriotic attitude towards their republic and sense of national pride. The magazine Salawat Küpere was founded in 1990. The first issue was published in March of 1990, and it is still published monthly. This is the only magazine for children between the ages of 5 and 12 years published in the Tatar language. The editor-in-chief of the magazine is the writer, journalist, and publisher Zinnur Hosniyar. The idea of publishing the magazine belongs to him. According to the editorial board, the Salawat Küpere magazine is being prepared to meet the interests, aspirations, and needs of young readers. This magazine helps to organize the cognitive activities of children in the world to ensure their physical, intellectual, and emotional attitude and emotional development, as well as to establish relationships with the family and the environment. The editorial board constantly gets acquainted with the requirements and innovative measures introduced and approved by the Minister of Education of the Republic of Tatarstan in the field of methodological support of the preschool and primary education and training system. The magazine presents the works of the well-known Tatar children's writers like Zinnur Hosniyar, Labib Liron, Rustem Mingalim, Raul Fayzullin, Waqif Nuriyev, Robert Mignulin, folk tales, texts about the world around the children, and so on. Methodologically, I will rely on Aleida Asman's approach, who argues that institutions and corporations, as well as cultures, nations, states, a church or a firm, do not have memory, for it is constructed by them with the help of memorial signs and symbols. Through this memory, institutions and corporations simultaneously construct their own identities. Therefore, I will not extrapolate the visual representation of history that was in the magazine Salawat Küpere to other periodicals or talk about the Tatar intelligentsia as a whole. Despite the fact that the title of the paper contains the notion of trauma, nevertheless, following Alexander Etkind, I rely on the concept of mourning more than on other concepts. He says that trauma is a response to a condition that had been experienced by the self. Mourning is a response to a condition of the other. The main sections within which the formation of children's identity was carried out can be considered the following. So the first one is we have our mark on history. Biz tarihta izlebbiz. The second one is qibla. And the third one is ornament, naqish. The first and second of the mentioned sections appeared already in the first issue of the magazine in March of 1990. The first section was named after the line from a poem by the famous Tatar poet Abdullah Tukay, a phrase that became extremely popular in the 1990s. The second section also appeared in the first issue, but did not yet have the title by which it would later be recognized. Thus, in the first issue, under this section, an adapted version of the stories of Joseph by Bulgar poet Qulgali, based on the Quranic stories about Prophet Joseph, was published. After the fall of the Soviet regime, ideologically based on atheism, interest in religious issues was inherent in all spheres, all culture, including the press. The third section, ornament, was less obviously associated with the formation of the identity of Muslim Tatars in children. It was more about the fact that the ancestors of the Muslim Tatars had developed skills in the field of various crafts, processing stone and leather, metal, and jewelry. In this, the magazine Salawat Küpere was embedded in the tradition of constructing the history of the Muslim Tatars, which was characteristic of the periodicals of the Muslim Tatars of the Russian Empire in the early 20th century. In particular, the journal Shura was dominated by the concept of civilized nation, Madani Millet, which, among the others, implied the possession of advanced crafts and scholarship. Thus, in the first section, if the first section was intended to narrate the glorious history of modern Muslim Tatars, with an emphasis on the military glory of their ancestors, the second section was entirely devoted to the religious topics, where information about Islamic dogmas was given in a form adapted for children, as well as the Quranic stories and the history of the prophets were told. The third section supplemented the historical religious discourse with information on crafts. The rest of the material published in the magazine was not ideologically colored. And the language of the magazine also influenced the formation of the identity of the Muslim Tatars. In the above-mentioned sections, the language differed from the Soviet version of the Tatar language, which included a large number of Russian borrowings and was overloaded, on the contrary, with Arabic and Persian borrowings. This fact makes it related to pre-revolutionary newspapers and journals. Within the framework of this research, I will try to reveal how the history of the ancestors of modern Muslim Tatars was constructing using visual materials within the section "We Have Our Mark on History." Biz tarihta izlibız. This study deals with the problem of visual representation of the Tatar history in the children's magazine Salawat Küpere. The research is based first of all, on the section, "We Have Our Own Mark on History." The glorious image of the past was complemented by illustrations published in this section ornament. For children's picture magazine, visual material is almost more significant than printed text. The iconography of the images of the national heroes, Milli Kahramanlar, was varied, and the analysis of the images allows us to capture those characteristics that were not present in the discourse of the glorious history. In the illustrations which are devoted to the Tatar history, the glory of the ancestors is evidenced by both the background and the characters depicted in these pictures. In these illustrations, the Bulgar army is depicted as a large, well-armed cohort under the leadership of a commander riding a richly decorated horse and wearing armor. Great importance is attached to the recognition of the characters depicted in the illustrations through the traditional ornaments on the clothes. Men were portrayed only with a beard. One of the main metaphors describing the military glory of the Bulgar army was traditional Tatar leather shoes, shitikler. The everyday shape of these shoes usually had no patterns, while the festive version was made using the leather mosaic technique. In the illustrations, one can see exactly festive version of the shoes on the feet of both the military leader and ordinary soldiers. This emphasis on footwear is embedded in the well-known legend. According to it, once having seen the Bulgar warriors shod in leather shoes, Vladimir the Great abandoned his plans to conquer the Bulgars. This legend is also found in the pre-revolutionary Tatar press. The repeating motif of the Volga idyll, on the banks of which one can see fortress walls, powerful structures, were designed to create an image of an independent and strong state. The Tatar city becomes recognizable thanks to the mosques and, in particular, the towers, which are in the background. The second row is represented by the images of the conquest of Kazan, executions and imprisonments of national Milli heroes. The conquest of Kazan was visualized as a burning of the city. The illustration shows clear religious markers of the defenders of the conquered Kazan and the conquerors. Burning Kazan is a burning mosque. The army of Ivan the Terrible is represented by numerous well-armed soldiers. The Russian army also has a religious marker, the Orthodox banner used during military actions, Harugv. The mourning of the conquered Kazan was demonstrated not only through mourning of the city, but also through mourning of the national heroes. Fetters on the martyrs, in Islamic tradition, shaheeds, are the main metaphor for the lack of freedom of the conquered heroes. The image was implemented by instruments of torture and executions and overseers accompanying the doomed heroes to the scaffold. The background is churches, which are designed to notify the viewer about the change of scenery and the historical context. One can note the emotional difference between the two types of illustrations. The first was aimed at evoking admiration and sense of pride caused by the ancestors. The second type evokes empathy for the heroes' victims. The illustrations placed under the section ornament and some pictures from the section we have our mark on history complement the image of the glorious past, depicting bazaars with an abundance of various goods, bodily purity of the people through baths, as well as artisans at work. Thus, the children's magazine Salawat Küpere presents its own version of the history of the Tatars. On the one hand, the past visualized on the pages of the magazine is the glorious history of the ancestors, which in turn consists of military glory and the image of a civilized people. On the other hand, the story written in the magazine is an mourning both for the city of Kazan, conquered by Ivan the Terrible, and for the national Milli heroes who were captured and executed. Thank you.